Hi everyone, welcome to the October 11th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona, and this week we are taking a look back at stakes racing from all around the country as we saw the final round of Breeders' Cup prep races take place at a variety of venues, especially Keeneland, where they opened their fall meet this past weekend. We saw graded stakes, multiple graded stakes on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday that are going to have major Breeders' Cup implications. Also some Breeders' Cup preps at Aqueduct or Belmont at the Big A, and out at Santa Anita we saw some impressive 2-year-old performances. My typical co-host Craig Milkowski is taking the week off. He's celebrating his 30th wedding anniversary, so happy anniversary to Craig, but I'm happy to have my daily Racing Form colleague Marcus Hersh filling in this week to go over some of these races. And Marcus, there's certainly a lot to talk about because I think we got some answers as to who's going to be in the Breeders' Cup and who's going to be favored in some of these races.
Yeah, it was a very active week. Short fields in New York, but some decent horses. I agree. There were a lot of really good. I saw a lot of performances this weekend that I thought were, not just preps in name, but like real, like serious contenders.
I agree with that, and especially in the dirt races, I think we got a lot of answers this week. The turf races are always a little bit in flux for the next couple of weeks as some of those European horses have their final preps closer to the race and connections make decisions as to who's going to come and who's not. And I think some of the Americans are on pins and needles to see how many of the American contenders can get into those races, given the preference that's often given to the international contenders.
Yeah.
But I think we have some answers about the dirt races in particular.
Yeah, and there aren't too many races left. We've got the British Champions card at Ascot on Saturday, but that's so close that I don't think too many of the best horses there are coming. I mean, weirdly, Modern Games is still in the entries. He hasn't been taken out yet. He's the prohibitive BC Mile favorite. I mean, I can't imagine they. I don't. We'll see what happens. And then the 22nd, there's a big 2-year-old race in England, the Vertem Futurity, which a couple horses who were mentioned for the Breeders' Cup are maybe running into. But I kind of have the sense, David, that might be a lesser group of Europeans this year. We'll see.
Yeah, I have not heard too many confirmations. You're following that a lot more closely than I am. I was also kind of wondering if we're going to see a large Japanese contingent this year. It seems like that might not be the case. Haven't seen too many reporting about that.
Yeah, next to nothing is from what I understand.
Yeah, a little disappointing. You would have thought there'd be more of that with the Breeders' Cup at Keeneland, but perhaps not this year. That can be somewhat random depending on the horses that come forward and develop. But we'll see how that all comes together from an international standpoint in the next few weeks. Let's take a look back, though, at some of these American-based contenders. And the way I arranged it is we're going to go through division by division, hopping back between tracks to talk about some of these races with horses that might be facing off against each other coming out of the preps we saw last weekend. I think we saw two of the most dominant performances in the distaff division this past weekend. Let's begin with one of these two impressive Todd Pletcher trained fillies at Keeneland on Sunday, the Grade 1 Spinster, won by the 4-year-old filly Malathaat. And Marcus, it just seems like she's really gained some focus in the second half of this season.
I think that it was easier to be focused against horses that couldn't possibly beat her.
Yeah.
That's how I would put it. But I agree. I mean, I don't know how much I buy the lack of focus thing. I feel like people were making excuses when she was getting beat by Clairiere. And that's an opinion that I'm going to hold close to my heart through the Breeders' Cup pending. But she has now won 2 Grade 1s in a row. I mean, Clairiere didn't show up after she bashed the gate and cut her mouth at Saratoga. So that is still a good win. This was a race that it was a perfect prep, really, because I don't think she had to exert much at all. She, like Army Wife, had a little moment in the Iowa Oaks last year and then at Saratoga, but she hasn't really come forward this year. And the fact that she managed to get a clear second in the race kind of shows how abysmal the rest of the field ran. And poor Latruska, I mean, she had such a great 2021. It looks like the personal ensign where she battled hard was her last gasp. And I was suspicious of Play Hard's quality, which was kind of confirmed in the way she faded. So Malathaat, right, was kind of meant to win and she didn't have to run hard. And if you liked her for the Breeders' Cup going in, you probably like her just as well coming out.
That's a fair point, and I guess I brought up the added focus because Malathaat winning by over 5 lengths is not a sight that
True.
we've gotten accustomed to seeing. I mean, I think since she won the Tempted as a 2-year-old, she's never won a race by more than a length. I think by less than that margin in all of her victories since then, up until this spinster. So, like you said, she did what she was supposed to do. I don't think it's a big surprise given the fact that Latruska didn't really show up here, that she was as dominant as she was, but it's definitely a good sign that she seems to be in such razor sharp form heading into a race like the Breeders' Cup. And I think it's just a natural segue to talk about her main rival, Nest, out of the same Todd Pletcher stable, and very similar looking performance at Aqueduct on Sunday when she won the Grade 2 Beldam over the same 9 furlong distance.
At 1-20.
Yes. Facing a softer field, I would say.
Yeah, it was a soft field. I mean, again, like I kind of felt like all she had to do was show up and she was going to win. I mean, I would say that she broke decently, and I know that sometimes that hasn't always been the case, and she's definitely holding her form, but I didn't feel like I really learned anything. I mean, she won by almost 10 lengths, but I mean, the competition was just travel column is not much at all. She was the only horse who had ever shown anything close to the quality that could have even remotely made her a real competitor for Nest. But um, she did it well. She got a good number. She's holding her form. She's still a 3-year-old, so she's supposed to be getting better, even though she's had a very active campaign. But I feel exactly, David, the same way I do about Malathaat with hers. I don't, nothing about that race changed the way I feel about it.
For me, it was just a carbon copy of her Alabama, except it was against weaker competition. Same thing, where they kept her out in the clear. She made that sweeping move at the quarter pole, and Irad Ortiz kept her well out into the middle of the racetrack. The same thing he did in the Alabama. I don't know if that's strategy or just allowing her to gain momentum without cutting the corner, but she did drift over to the inside late in the race. Not that that mattered at all. I mean, she was being geared down at the very end. She has won these last 2 races just with incredible ease. I mean, she's basically just been eased into the wire for the last furlong each time. So I think people might be projecting that there's more in the tank that we haven't quite seen yet. Maybe you couldn't say the same about Malathaat as easily as she did win the Spinster on Sunday. Does set up an intriguing matchup between these two. Obviously, Nest is the 3-year-old, so potentially there's a bit more upside there. But they're coming in having run pretty similar numbers from a speed figure standpoint. So definitely one of the Saturday matchups at the Breeders' Cup that I think people are anticipating.
Yeah, well, I'm also looking forward to 2 Steve Asmussen trained horses in that race. The Progressive Society, who I think is, I don't know, she's interesting. And then Clairiere, who had a huge excuse last time and who beat Malathaat twice and who was on her way to, like, she really was ascendant earlier this year. I think she's got a big chance to bounce back. And putting those all together, I think it's one of the more compelling distaffs of recent years.
I completely agree. There's real depth in that division, and you just hope they all stay healthy because it sets up one of the better distaffs that we can think of in recent memory if they all make it to the race. Search results included, running that big race in the personal ensign last time. Just 5 or 6 fillies that really make it an interesting meeting of those top runners.
100%.
Let's move on to another division that saw just one prep race this past weekend at Aqueduct on Saturday. The feature race was the Grade 1 Joe Hersh Turf Classic, and we saw a female beating the boys here as the 5-year-old mare Warlike Goddess got the better of, I guess, what are some of the better marathon turf runners out there in the U.S., but I'm not sure that that's saying too much about Warlike Goddess's performance.
Well, I thought Soldier Rising easily ran the second best race. I don't understand what his rider was really attempting to accomplish in the stretch, but he had no clear passage. But he wasn't going to beat this horse. I thought it was unlike the Malathaat and Nest performances. This was something that kind of could change your opinion on this horse, who we know pretty well by now. But clearly, the edict came down from on high that there was no reason to fall out the back door with her, which has been at times the way she's been ridden. But she, for a horse to, I mean, it's a pretty radical change in style, and she kept up decently. They certainly weren't going fast, but it wasn't just a crawl. And for her to travel as well as she did from just a length and a half, 2.5 length and a half off the leader, and then still finish so well, I think bodes well for her chances. It just obviously, I mean, she can be ridden the other way too, and she has a great turn of foot. I thought she was probably the best horse in the Breeders' Cup filly and mare turf last year. Um, and do you know how much weight she gets, David, in the from the males? Maybe 3 pounds or
I think
something.
it is
Probably
just
not.
3 pounds. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't believe in weight spreads here. But I mean, I think she's an excellent horse. I think she's like you said, the division is not that great um, right now, but I still think she's legitimate, and she has shown a fondness for a turf course that can be tricky for some horses to handle, and does not mind softer ground. So I think this was a really good prep for her, and the change in her running style and her ability to race effectively with that. It's something to pay attention to, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think her biggest asset is that ability to begin a run from a long way out and sustain it. And that
Yes.
was one of the things that impressed me most about her last year when Julien Leparoux, her prior rider, would ride her differently than the jockeys who have been on her this year, especially Rosario did, where he would launch her run at about the 3/8 pole, not afraid to go wide on the turn, and she would just continue on and demolish fields. I think they got a little more conservative this year, not trying to win races by as large margins as you said. They took her a little farther back in the pack, kept things closer. It is, as you said, nice to see that she could sit closer to the pace and still deliver that same sustained finish that we saw. Do you think she has any real chance to win a race like the Breeders' Cup Turf? It's not totally clear exactly who's coming over from Europe. It's just so hard for an American to win that race these days.
I absolutely think that she can win the race. It's not going to be a vintage turf. It just isn't. I mean, Rebels Romance for Godolphin and Appleby is he's a good horse. Won in Germany last out. He's never lost on turf. He was campaigned on synthetics and dirt in Dubai early. But he's not he beat the German Derby winner last time. It was a solid race, but I'm not looking at him as like some invincible force, And besides him, uh, Stone Age, Broom, Mishriff. I mean, those horses I don't think have a huge edge on More Like Goddess. I think she could win.
Yeah, that's a good point. It does not seem, at least from reporting we've seen so far, that the top Euros are coming over for this race. So it definitely gives her a chance. She feels like she has by far the strongest shot of the Americans, given this
Agreed.
prep. I mean, especially with the kind of perplexing collapse of Gufo in this race. I mean, not that I've ever been this horse's biggest fan, but kind of a shocker that he finished last year.
Yeah, no, that was bad. I mean, maybe it was one too many because they squeezed in the Kentucky Downs race where he ran hard. And he's such a quirky horse. I mean, I like him. I'm an admirer, but I mean, will he go to the Breeders' Cup off that? I don't know.
What I will say is they took the temporary rails down this week at Aqueduct on that inner turf course, and he was the only horse in this race that never saw the rail at any point. And it did seem like he wanted to save some ground on that course, but still, that doesn't seem like a full excuse for how badly he ran. So, not a good prep for him right before what I would imagine is the target race.
Yeah, yeah. I wonder if he'd run Soldier Rising in the turf. I mean, he's a pretty progressive horse who really didn't have much chance last weekend.
I think it would be a question of whether he gets in because he doesn't really have anything other than some optional claiming victories. That the credentials aren't quite there, even though he's been
That's
improving
true.
lately.
I'm looking for a list at a list right now that has horses like Kiddo Dan and Win from Within on it.
So maybe he's got a good shot. We'll see. I have not
No,
seen
I
the
mean
size
they
yet.
want to run by Melvin too. So
Yeah, no, I mean he got the right pace set up here, but just could not contain that late finish from More Like Goddess. Well, let's stick with the turf divisions, but move to some shorter distances. Talk about some horses that could be prepping for the Breeders' Cup Mile. We saw two of those races at a mile at Keeneland on Saturday. The Grade 1 Coolmore Turf Mile was won by the 3-year-old Annapolis, who just feels like a really progressive sort for Todd Pletcher. I mean, he had shown promise right from the start, was supposed to be the favorite in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf last year prior to being sidelined. It always kind of felt like a mile would be right up his alley. They tried going longer a couple times this year, but it just feels like turning back to this distance has really kind of just made everything click into place for him, and it's happening at the right time prior to the Breeders' Cup.
I agree with all of that. And even though he got his year started several months ago in the Penn Mile, I just feel like there's still more in the tank. Um, this was a pretty solid pace. I think the course was quite fast. but they went a legitimate gallop. I guess what was as impressive as anything to me was how manageable this horse was, and he had speed, but he also has run well from farther off the pace. Don't think he'd want to be too far off or need to be too far off, but he was the rider was able to use his pace to get a perfect spot, and then this horse was very kind, just traveling along sweetly in the bridle the whole way. He looked like a winner a long, long way out, I thought.
He did.
It was just a question of finding room, and then he went well clear with a nice turn of foot, and I thought yeah, it was a perfect trip, but he got the perfect trip because of the characteristics that he possesses, and I thought he really finished it off nicely, in like one of the more impressive mile performances this year.
Yeah, this has been a totally wide open division. Few horses have won more than one Grade One race in this division. One of those would have been Casa Creed, I guess, if you count the Jaipur.
That's right. A great count again is the other one.
Yes. Who is sidelined until next year. He won't be running. Among those that finished behind Annapolis, Ivar showed up with his typical good effort at Keeneland, though in some ways he just flatters modern games from the Woodbine Mile because he finished a good 5+ lengths ahead of Ivar that day. He was only beaten a length and a half by Annapolis here. Arguably, he did have some trouble in that Woodbine Mile, but not enough to bridge that kind of gap. You could say it just makes modern games look more formidable heading into the Breeders' Cup.
He is going to be formidable unless he runs in the QE2, which would really change everything. I mean, I don't know. But as far as a Breeders' Cup horse, I don't see why Annapolis would have to regress. And granted, the course could be a lot wetter, which you wouldn't want to see. But if there's not too much rain, I think he's going to be a major player in that race.
And I kind of think one of the reasons that we often don't see 3-year-olds have an impact in races like the Breeders' Cup Mile is because often they get their years started pretty early. It's rare that you get a 3-year-old like this that missed the first half of the season, is kind of just getting into gear, still coming into October pretty fresh. This was just, it was his 5th start of the year, but he hadn't gotten started until June in that Penn Mile. So it just feels like he's hitting his stride at the right moment. So I agree. He's a legit player heading into that Breeders' Cup. Did you see any excuses for anybody behind? I mean, Casa Creed did get a wide trip, but I think you have to question whether or not he's the kind of horse that can handle or work out a trip in a large field that he's going to see in the Breeders' Cup Mile.
I think he's cutting back for the sprint. Almost certain that that's where he's going to run instead of the mile. But even there, it's going to be on the short side for him. And more concerning to me is he doesn't love that course. He ran there a couple times in 2020. When he wasn't quite the same horse he is now, but he didn't run quite to form there either. So yeah, I mean, Order of Australia had a pretty good trip. He ran creditably, but he has zero upside at this point in his career. But he could be a horse to fill out the gimmicks in the Breeders' Cup. But and then behind, like I was surprised Mason was so intent on the lead, but he's not getting any better. I doubt he'll even show up. Santine was a big disappointment. He didn't have a good start, but he just never looked. He looked lifeless the entire race to me.
Yeah, he's just one of those horses that loved that quirky Churchill Downs course and has not quite been the same on any other turf course. So I think those 2 races he ran in the Arlington Million on turf classes sort of live in isolation.
To be fair, he ran great in the Hollywood Derby with an impossible post and trip right behind Beyond Brilliant and his 2-year-old season.
Totally, yeah.
And that gave me hope that it wasn't just Churchill, but it's starting to look like that really made him shine. I agree with you.
The other Grade 1 mile turf race that was run at Keeneland on Saturday was the First Lady for the females. This one, unsurprisingly, dominated by Chad Brown runners. In Italian and Regal Glory met up once again like they did in the Just a Game earlier in the year. Different result this time, as it really seems like In Italian has taken a step forward since then, especially since they've allowed her to use her speed in races like this. It also helps that there's nobody to press her in the early going, as the other Chad Brown potential speed technical analysis just basically sat second without applying any pressure.
Yeah, I don't think technical analysis is fast enough to go within Italian. And also, when Regal Glory beat In Italian in the Just a Game, In Italian was basically a sacrificial lamb for the glory of Regal Glory. I'm sorry, I mean, the Legs Galore was in from California with a ton of speed from the rail. And I loved In Italian in that race too. And I'm still annoyed that she was ridden so close to the pace where if they would have taken a little hold and let let her stay 5 lengths off. But she's fabulous. But she's going in the filly and mare turf. That's what the trainer said. Where I think she's going to be like a major player. But Regal Glory is supposed to run in the mile.
I think it's interesting to split them up like that. The filly and mare turf, it does sometimes turn into a paceless race. So I think that running a horse like an Italian there, it makes sense. She has no proven form going quite that far. She did win, of course, the Diana going 9 furlongs using pretty enterprising tactics. So she showed some stamina there. We'll see what kind of turf course she gets at Keeneland in November. Because what I will say about an Italian is that she has gotten some hard, firm turf courses to run over these last 2 times, both in the Diana and the First Lady, and she clearly loves that kind of going. So we'll see what she gets a little bit later in the year. Regal Glory, I thought that she ran well once again. The pace worked against her a little bit. They went the first half in 47, the second half in 46-1, so she was closing into a slightly quicker second half of the race. I thought she ran fine in the 4-star Dave prior to this too. I mean, maybe you'll say she lost a step because she's lost these last 2, but I just think she's run into some better horses who got better trips.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I thought in the 4-star Dave, it took her a little bit longer to get going than I expected. And that might have slightly been the case there. And I don't know, that's not really losing a step if it's even the case. But I mean, she is 6. It's the end of her 6-year-old year, and she has been going steady since winter. She certainly doesn't have room to get any better. She can only, in my mind, get worse. But I mean, she did finish 3 1/4 legs in front of Princess Grace, who's a nice horse in her own right. I mean, she's run some big races too. Is that enough to win the Breeders' Cup Mile? Probably not.
Yeah, I don't know. It seems like a tough assignment for her, but boy, she just shows up every time and tries hard. So you have to respect the grit that Regal Glory possesses.
Agree, and she's got 3 good races now at Keeneland, which is also encouraging.
Let's move on to some of the sprint divisions, and we'll kind of talk about them in a clump. Let's begin with the turf race that they ran at Keeneland on Saturday. The Woodford, the prep for the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint. This one won by the winner of last year's Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint, Golden Pal. And Marcus, I think this was a situation where you could see what you want to see in this performance with Golden Pal. If you were a fan going in, the raw time just validated that this horse is going to be unbeatable in the Breeders' Cup. If you thought that there were some chinks in the armor coming into this race, I think you could see some reasons to be skeptical moving out of it.
Well, I thought they were going to raid him again because he'd been working behind horses so kindly, and he didn't need to. Okay, I mean, I was glad to see him break on top because that's his strength, and I was glad to see him just show. I mean, the course was fast. He still went very fast. He's no better than he is last year, and he may not be as good. This was not a great field behind him. The competition, I think, is going to get considerably stiffer, although maybe only with one horse. I mean, the Highfield Princess is really good. I know she's supposed to come from overseas. I'm just glancing at my list here real quick. Yeah, there were some other Europeans on here too. The thing is, though, I mean, Bran, he ran pretty well at Kentucky Downs. Arrest Me Red, he's not going to beat Golden Pal. I don't know that I mean, this was not great, but there might not be anyone to run with him even in the Breeders' Cup. We'll see.
Is Wesley Ward planning to run his filly Campanelli in this race too?
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's the one horse who can beat him. Yeah, I mean she's phenomenal, and I like her cutting back from the 6.5 plus at Kentucky Downs. I guess she's just training up to it. I'm glad you mentioned her, and I can't believe I forgot her because that's the most formidable opponent that he's going to face, I believe.
Yeah, I would say with regard to this performance, the speed figures came back large, and I probably haven't been mentioning enough of these speed figures as we go through. He got a 106 buyer for this race, a 125 TimeformUS speed figure. I think it's a tough day to make speed figures because they ran very few turf races at Keeneland the first couple days of this meet. This was the only turf sprint that they ran on Saturday. And the fractions, they seem typical Golden Pal fast, but it's not like the rest of the field couldn't keep up with him. I mean, Gear Jockey was in attendance to that pace, and
that was crazy.
Yeah, you don't really think of Gear Jockey as a 21-1 opening quarter kind of horse. So I'm not really sure what to make of the very fast fractions and raw time of this race. Golden Pal was getting leg weary at the end. The race was arguably falling apart a little bit, but even Artemis City Limits was coming back at him at the end of the race. So I don't know. I don't feel like he's better than last year, certainly. Arguably, he's taken a step backwards, and some of these things they've tried with him, rating him, the trip overseas again, maybe they've taken their toll. We'll see. But he figures to be a very short price on Breeders' Cup Day. So if you have a negative opinion on him, that could be a spot where you're able to make a score. Let's move on to some of the preps for the Breeders' Cup Sprint that I guess I'll put a question mark or quotations around that. I don't know if they're real to legitimate preps for that race, but the Grade 2 Phoenix at Keeneland on Saturday just came back awfully slow. When you see horses like Maniwa and Long Range Toddy battling to the wire, I think there's not really a Breeders' Cup Sprint contender in this race.
Yeah, that was Friday. Just a minor correction for
Friday.
your listeners who are going to be scrambling to find fault. I think, I can't believe Maniwa won this race. I thought Special Reserve was cooked. I was right about that. I thought Sibelius had a chance to run back to his good races, his last two, which came out of nowhere. But no, he fell back to his more typical form. He's not an especially high-level sprinter. I guess, they went a pretty good pace. Manny Walla has run well at Keeneland before, but all credit to him for winning the race. And the trainer, Wayne Catalano, has done a great job keeping him going for quite some time. But I think Jackie's Warrior is like maybe the surest winner of the whole 2 days, the Breeders' Cup at this point.
Yeah, I think it just depends on what Chad Brown decides to do with Jack Christopher, which race they run in. To me, it would be a no-brainer to run in the sprint, but I haven't seen confirmation yet.
I feel the same way about Cody's Wish. I'm surprised they're not more bullish on the sprint, too.
Yeah, you get more pace in that race. Those horses are all more proven around one turn than two turns, so we'll see how that develops, but I agree. Jackie's Warrior looks like he's going to be tough.
Yeah, even against Jack Christopher at 3/4, I don't think they're going to beat the horse. But I thought that he couldn't lose last year too, so I guess I should pull myself up a little there.
Well, he did have that legit excuse, so they say last year.
I think so.
The Phoenix was just a complete paced collapse, and that's why you get a chaotic result like the one we
Correct.
saw. Opposite of pace collapse was what we saw in the Vosburg at Aqueduct on Saturday. Similar level of quality it seemed going in, but I do think that the winner of this race, Elite Power, took yet another step forward and showed good versatility in being able to sit right on top of that slow pace and still produce his strong finish. I think we don't really yet know quite what this horse is or where he's going.
I agree with all of that. It's hard to rate him because there was such a limited bunch behind him. What do you got, a 101 buyer, a 114 time form figure?
Yeah.
It's pretty good, right?
Yeah, and the time form figure obviously is held down by pace. We're never going to see a high time form US speed figure in a race that features a slow pace like this. Yeah.
Correct. They're walking. Yes. But this horse is like he's gotten very good. Can he win the Breeders' Cup? I'd be surprised, but I thought right after watching him was one of those cases where it was ridiculous pace and it was a really soft Vosburg. And so the tendency is to just say, well, that doesn't mean anything. But flying in the face of that is how this horse has run in his last couple starts, and his arrow pointing up already coming into it. I agree with you. He might be okay.
Yeah, he's kind of a funny horse. He's a son of Curlin. I think almost $1 million purchase for Judmont. Kind of has more of a classic pedigree, but
Yeah.
It seems like he handles these sprint distances, and it's been quite a year for Bill Mott. With different horses in New York, he's won the Carter, the Forgo, and now the Vosburg. Obviously, Speaker's Corner has since gone the wrong way, but having horses like Cody's Wish and Elite Power, reportedly Elite Power is heading towards the Breeders' Cup Sprint, so he'll certainly get more pace in there.
Yeah, no, Mott just generally has been incredible this year.
Well, we'll wrap up the preps for the Breeders' Cup Dirt Sprint races by going over to the female side of things to talk about the Grade 2 Thoroughbred Club of America, a prep race that took place on Saturday at Keeneland. And Marcus, this one looked pretty competitive going in, I thought. It also seemed like there was quite a bit of pace on paper. None of that really materialized on the track as Slammed got to the front end, didn't have to go that fast to do it, and just dominated this field.
Yeah, she was. It was the Palm Cottage horse who was supposed to be fast inside, and she made a brief attempt at the lead and then gave that up, and she was done thereafter. Slammed has gotten really good. She had trouble in the Rancho Bernardo, and at the start, where she was nipped by Edgeway. I think she's a very legitimate horse. However, she's not Breeders' Cup eligible. I believe it would cost $100,000 to supplement her. And while she kind of like she merits a spot in the field off her form this year, and the win over the track, this that could be a far more demanding spot than that. I mean, I don't know. I think it'd be a tough call. You got Cece, Goodnight Olive, obligatory Kamari if she doesn't go against the boys, Echo Zulu. Yeah, it's those are some good horses. It's a way deeper spot. I wonder what they'll decide to do.
I mean, I guess the one thing you could say is one of the more open Breeders' Cup races because there's no dominant runner in that division. I mean, I guess you could argue it's Kamari, though. I mean, she just has those two big victories, and she was hardly the most trustworthy horse before that. So we'll see how that develops. But I mean, yeah, I was not aware that she's not Breeders' Cup nominated. I do think stretching out to 7 furlongs might not be the best thing for her. She just seems like one of
Agree.
these big burly mare or fillies, I should say, who is much more of a 3/4 type than a 7 furlong horse. But we'll see about that. They've done a great job with her, and she's really stepped up her game as they've tried these tougher races. But this was the best performance we've seen from her so far on Saturday.
Yeah, she's a nice horse.
Let's move on to the 2-year-olds, and I think it makes sense to start with the most impressive performance that we saw last week from the juveniles, and that took place out in Southern California at Santa Anita, the Grade 1 American Pharoah. Cave Rock, I mean, I guess you have to say he is the best 2-year-old since Uncle Mo, American Pharoah. I mean, he's
Yeah,
on that level for sure.
absolutely. I don't know what the time for figures stack up like, but just on buyers, he's faster than most of the older horses. Like he's like faster than Hot Rod Charlie, for instance, already. Which is, I mean, obviously, that's a number, not a race, but the point is he's an extraordinary horse. And I think he just, he kind of felt the effect of his incredibly fast debut in his second start. He kind of just went through the motions, but just watching him go and looking at his pedigree, I was absolutely certain he would stretch out. And boy, did he ever stretch out. I mean, he's an absolute powerhouse. He sets a strong pace and doesn't even feel it. It looks like he comes into the stretch just like roaring. He's a freak. It's great. I mean, I was a big fan of Arrogate. Whatever, people can say what they want about his trainer, but I thought he was just a fabulous horse. I was lucky enough to be in Dubai to watch that race, which was one of the best races I've ever seen a horse run. And he's been iffy as a stallion. Maybe hasn't gotten off to the greatest start, but his horses have been coming around, and I just figured he'd be imparting stamina. And this horse has just an unbelievable combination of speed and stay to him.
Yeah, I had some questions about him stretching out. Just based on the dam side pedigree, there is a little bit more speed and precocity there. And you always wonder about horses that show such brilliant speed. Is it just going to so naturally translate to going 2 turns? And
Absolutely.
he really answered that question here. I mean, it reminded me so much of Uncle Mo's Champagne when he had to go fast early, and there was that question kind of in your mind at the quarter pole, what's going to happen now? And as soon as he switched leads, it was like he almost started running downhill. He just hit another gear, and the rest of the field started going backwards. I mean, just this horse finishes so
Yeah.
powerfully in every one of his races. He's got that finish that you think of Arrogate. I mean, it brings to mind his sire, which I guess it should. He moves the same way. Very exciting horse. Figures to be the biggest favorite that we see on that Breeders' Cup Friday card.
Yeah, he's going to be tough. I mean, he's 649 for his last 16th. No horses feel the effect of a fast pace more than 2-year-olds going 2 turns on dirt. We see huge deceleration, and for him to come home that fast and doing it pretty comfortably, he's going to be a handful. I mean, he hasn't shipped yet, and it's going to be a lot of new stuff thrown at him. So, but it's exciting to think about seeing him on the big stage. You got to think that like in a regular year, National Treasure would have won this race comfortably and been a totally legitimate winner.
Totally. And also in a regular year, we'd be looking at the next race we're going to talk about, the Breeders' Futurity, and saying, well, these are the two favorites for the juvenile coming out of it. Because, let's not give short shrift to Forte and Loggins. They put on a real show at Keeneland on Saturday, and they ran a reasonably fast race in their own right and beat, just a stacked, huge field of runners to get it done. Just to work out a trip in this race took some doing. And these two did so and put on a nice show to the wire.
Oh, I agree. That was the Breeders' Futurity can come up a weak race a lot of times. It was almost 7 lengths back to third. Forte won, and he did well to win. I like the horse. I don't know what happened in the Sanford, where I thought he was a sure winner, but he's done in his other races have been nothing but good things, and he's a likable colt. He rated kindly and showed some gears and some grit, but I got to think that Loggins is the horse that I'd want coming out of the race. I don't know that he might not have. It was going to be really close, closer than a neck, if Forte doesn't come down on him as they're battling to the wire. That was meaningful contact that was made, and for this horse, I loved him stretching out. I certainly didn't love him at 3-2, going from a maiden sprint win into the Breeders' Futurity around 2 turns. But you can see why it was that price if you saw his debut. His gallops out are can be meaningless a lot of the time. But one place where I think they're not meaningless is with young horses that are sprinting and are going to be stretching out. And this horse on pedigree and on his first race where he wasn't even on the early lead looked like he would stretch out, and he did. Um, I guess you could say that like Cave Rock would have set those splits and kept going and won off over Forte maybe, but Cave Rock was also one start ahead of Loggins. So we'll see. You wonder if this horse is going to feel the effect of that, because that was a huge performance.
Yeah, Loggins was coming back in just 3 weeks since the
Yeah, it
debut
was.
effort, so it's asking a lot for this horse to go on and win the Breeders' Cup off that kind of preparation. But he clearly has a ton of talent, as you said. He was digging back in on the rail. Arguably, the result might have been different if not for that contact late. I think that's debatable, and I understand why the stewards left this one up. I know people love to criticize Irad Ortiz, and often rightly so, for going over the line or crossing the line with regard to race riding. I thought this was more of a case of Forte drifting in, and Irad actually had to stop riding at the end to try to get him off the other horse, and won anyway. It's a tough one. I don't want to say that I necessarily disagree with the DQ, but I understand why people thought this horse should come down. From a pace standpoint, Loggins ran the better race, and if you look at the TimeformUS speed figures, he got the much bigger pace upgrade. Unsurprisingly, he got a 118 TimeformUS speed figure for this race as opposed to the 115 that Forte got in victory, and that 118 number is just 5 points off what Cave Rock got in the American Pharaoh, under different circumstances and different race, of course, so we'll see how they stack up when they face off in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, but I wouldn't just write off these horses because Cave Rock is in the race. I think both of these top two from the Breeders' Futurity are pretty talented.
I agree with you.
Let's move on to some of the preps for the juvenile fillies. At Keeneland on Friday, opening day, we saw the Grade 1 Alcibiades, and Marcus, there's just not quite the quality in this field of juvenile fillies. As Wonder Wheel got the job done narrowly here, I do question whether she's a horse that's a true two-turn type or whether she's just precocious enough to win a race like this at this stage of her career.
Yeah, completely. I'll give her credit. She's run several good races, and she's a Grade 1 winner now. And she didn't get to go slow. I don't know what your pace number for her was, but 47:16 is a legitimate pace.
Yeah, it was an honest pace, just borderline fast.
Yeah, but I agree. She was desperate. Chop Chop, the runner-up, was going turf to dirt for Cox. I think she took advantage of some tiring horses. And I think, call me crazy, but I think Raging Sea might have won the race had she not run into Jajera, or however you say it. She was running a little green and wasn't totally focused, and I felt like she was getting really, really just getting back into it and putting on a final surge when that contact was made. If you made me choose one horse out of here, it would be she.
I agree with that. I liked Raging Sea's debut at Saratoga a lot. I thought she showed a lot of favorable attributes in that race for the
Me
future.
too.
And this was asking a lot, as it is all for all of these horses to stretch out, especially just in her second career start. And there were a lot of tired fillies heading towards the wire in this Alcibiades, and it just seemed like she overreacted to the encouragement at the very end. I don't think it was anything that Jose Ortiz was intentionally trying to do. She just kind of got tired and veered out right at the very end there. So understandable disqualification. I guess you can debate whether Kijera was ever finishing better than fourth in here, but
Oh, I don't think there's any debate. She was not
yeah,
finishing.
I tend to agree with that. But when it's that blatant, I get why the stewards feel like they have to do something, whether or not you agree that they're following that rule to a T. There's just nobody out there in this division of juvenile fillies that I guess you have to be too scared of. I mean, Chocolate Gelato feels like she's going to be the favorite, and I don't know. She just ran okay in the Frisette, I thought. I mean, maybe they'll go more towards these
Agree.
horses that have the experience at Keeneland. We'll see
Agree.
about that. But
Yeah.
nobody's run that fast in this division.
I mean, the horses that ran best coming out of here, I think when we see the whole forum arrayed, are not going to look bad in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies.
I would agree with that. And, Kijera, who I do want to just briefly touch upon, I hope she can get in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies turf because she is a very nice turf horse. And
Yeah,
you would imagine the connections will want to go back to that surface. I just don't know exactly how the qualification and selection works for those races, but you'd hope she can get in there.
I think she can get in, and I can understand why they tried her, and I think it was worth a try. But I think she showed that she'd probably prefer to be on turf, and I agree. She's very nice. She could win that race.
We already talked about Arrogate having that one, a grade one winner at Santa Anita on Saturday. He got also a grade two win with And Tell Me No Lies winning the Chandelier, another prep for the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies. Much slower race in terms of the final time than Cave Rock ran in the American Pharoah. But I guess what's interesting to compare is the early fractions of this race and that race in the Chandelier, very similar. They just came so much more slowly in this race for the fillies.
Yeah, and Tell Me No Lies stumbled at the start, which may have helped her chances because,
Yeah.
if she would have been closer to the pace, then she too would have been gasping for air at the quarter pole. I don't want to come off as, like discrediting these horses for doing what they've done. And this horse has now run several good races in a row and is a grade two winner. And congratulations to her and her connections. But if I'm talking about this from strictly a handicapping perspective and looking at the Breeders' Cup, no thanks to anyone in here.
Yeah, I mean, I just look at the runner-up, a Calbred, who did not really have the credentials coming into this race, and she got within a length of the winner at the wire. It's a little bit of an indictment of the field.
Right. Justique
The runner-up is, yeah, go
Justique
ahead.
was the one who looked like she might be talented. I was iffy on her. I mean, she's one of those late closing sprint maiden winners where you don't really know what it means. She did get a good setup and she didn't run that fast. And then she got sick and missed an intended start. She might be better than this. I think she's got a chance to come forward, but I just don't think that there's that much there.
Yeah, I question that too. She was very visually impressive in the debut, got pace to close into that day. It remains to be seen what kind of horse she really is, a closing sprinter, maybe just a slower horse. I don't think we yet know. We didn't get a whole lot of answers on Saturday.
Exactly.
We saw plenty of stakes races for the 2-year-olds on the turf all across the country this past weekend. We'll try to talk about as many as we can because a few of them are key preps for Breeders' Cup races. Let's begin with the two they ran at Keeneland, the Bourbon and the Jessamine. The Bourbon for the Colts and Geldings, prep for the juvenile turf. And the winner is... now two for two at Keeneland. Came from the 12 hole to win this race. I liked everything I saw from him in this performance.
Are those fractions right?
It seems like an extremely fast pace. I know the turf course had gotten pretty hard, and the final time is fast as well, but it is a little hard to believe, right?
45.81, and the horse that was pressing held on for second. I mean, if they're right, then Deer District, who I kind of liked in the race, was tremendous. But I don't know. I mean, yeah, this horse got the dream setup of all time if those fractions are correct. That being said, I really like the way he looked winning. Sometimes, our eyes can deceive us where the whole field is stopping and one horse appears to be going faster than it was. I would like to think that my brain after this many years in races has tried to take that into account and separate that out. And I still liked this horse. I liked the way he finished. I like the look of him. I like his stride. He definitely doesn't look like a super precocious thing. He should be getting better into the fall. Um, and I think he's legit.
Yeah, but I will say, just looking at Craig's TimeformUS pace figures for this race, and he does take the run up into account when he does these, and I know the run up can be a significant factor at Keeneland
At
sometimes.
Keeneland, especially,
He's
yes.
got pace figures in the high 130s at the start of this race, which is fast. I mean, all the fractions are color coded in red that they're a fast pace. I mean, we've seen faster paces in some of these races. It's not like the fastest pace we've ever seen in one of these preps for the 2-year-olds, but things definitely had a right to come apart a little bit given the way that it shaped up. And the winner took advantage of that, but he had to cover ground to do so from that wide draw. I mean, he was never towards the rail, so nice performance from him and the runner-up, as you said, Deer District, who overcame that scenario a little bit. As for the Jessamine, completely different pace situation, as there wasn't a ton of speed side on going in, and kudos to the connections of Delight for sensing that and sending a filly who hadn't really been that aggressively ridden in her prior starts to the front end. I guess she was probably best anyway, but the ride certainly helped.
Yeah, non-kudos to the tactics on Bling, a stretch-out sprinter who was taken in hand to be dropped back to third after making the initial lead. That didn't work out very well. But I did like the way that Delight moved and went about her business off the Delaware turf route win. But I mean, given how fast that course was over the weekend, you see the 49:61 raw time for the half mile, and then I mean, and then taking account for the speed of the course, she just got away with an incredibly easy pace. I think you really have to give a lot of credit to Knock Your Socks Off, the runner up, making a long sustained run for second. I didn't think she was that fast. She improved massively, I think, off of her first couple races. She might be a horse to keep an eye on.
I agree with that. Knock your socks off. She blew the start. I mean, she was off a good 2 to 3 lengths behind the field, which is why she was so far back early. And to close as well as she did into that paceless situation, I thought you could argue she ran almost as well as the winner of the race. They're the two that you want out of here. And as well as Delight ran, it just makes me go back to that maiden race from August in Saratoga, where Kijira finished ahead of her. They were all beaten by Pink Hugh, who unfortunately has been sidelined for Chad Brown since then. We haven't seen her. I don't think we're going to until next year, probably. But that was a very key race. So it's just another reason why I brought up Kijira, hopefully getting back to turf in the future. As for the 2 stakes races they ran at Santa Anita that are preps for the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, Turf, and Juvenile Fillies, I don't think that we usually think of the Southern California preps as being the most potent for these races, but I will say the winner of the Zuma Beach, Paxawallop, he has been pretty dominant in his last couple of victories, and I get the sense this horse actually is okay. It'll just be a big step up in class when he goes to the Breeders' Cup.
Yeah, I mean, you were too kind. These preps, these California 2-year-old turf route preps have been basically meaningless for the Breeders' Cup. But I rate this horse higher than other horses recently. I think he's tactically versatile. I was impressed with how easily he kept up, and he gave himself a good trip. And I mean, I don't actually know the form that well. The horses behind him, a 44 to 1 shot finished second.
It's not that strong.
Well, I mean, as you'd think, but he did it. I thought he did it so easily. The question is just how he handles. I mean, the Californians are always. I think that it's reasonable to tend to expect regression if they come east and catch a soft autumn turf course. That's not what they're accustomed to, and usually not what they are going to run well on. That would be one of my main concerns with this horse. Also, he's going to be jumping into an infinitely tougher spot. But I do think he's pretty good.
I agree with that. Visually, he's impressed me. I just know he hasn't been beating that much, so we'll see what happens. Can't really say the same about Comanche Country, who won the Surfer Girl. I thought she got a great trip winning this race, cut it a little closer than her odds might have suggested she should, and she's 3 for 3 so far in this country, but it feels like the step up for her is even steeper.
Agree, and she's already done a lot this year. I mean, what improvement that she was going to have is most likely already happened for this season. I think she's like a perfectly fine horse, and I've liked her all along. She's got She's very rateable. She's got multiple moves. She's handy, but she's just not that fast. And she's stepping up in class, different course after running 3 race, improving throughout the last couple of months. It doesn't seem like a good set of circumstances.
Let's close things out by discussing a few of the preps for the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf Sprint. One of those took place at Keeneland, where the Turf Sprint will obviously be run on Sunday. And Marcus, I guess the biggest headline coming out of this race or into this race was the scratch of Love Reigns, who looked like way the horse to beat in here, the expected American-trained shortest price in this race. And she's just training up to it. Is that the story? A surprise to see her scratch from here.
I mean, I guess there's nothing wrong with her. It's just like Wesley Ward is going to do what he wants. He does not care what anybody says or what effect this has on any. Like, he had another horse in the race. He probably wanted to see if he could keep some horses out of the race by having the prohibitive favorite who would have been easily odds on here. But yeah, I mean, some people wouldn't have the guts to do that, but I don't think I mean, he immediately said Nicole Russo for DRF reported that she's just training up to the race, not that there's anything wrong with her. So I mean, she's really good. I think she's going to be tough to beat in next month. But Private Creed's a pretty good horse.
I agree. For Steve Asmussen, he's now won 3 out of 4 starts in his career. I mean, I guess flying under the radar a little bit despite winning these races, but he's getting the job done. We'll see if he can step up in a race like the Breeders' Cup, but I mean, he's got the experience over the course now. He's got that versatility to his running style. Probably just has to see who's coming over from Europe and how tough this race is ultimately going to be.
Well, I think there are some pretty good horses coming over from Europe.
It seems like it.
Well, at least one, the Platinum Queen. She's really good. Blackbeard for Aidan O'Brien. I think he might be running. Those are 2 pretty good ones. Between that and Love Reigns, it's going to be a tougher spot. And this horse, I know, just won at the 5.5, but he won pretty well going farther at Kentucky Downs. And I wonder if he might be best suited to slightly longer sprints.
Well, speaking of Love Reigns, we did see the 2 horses that she easily defeated at Saratoga in the Bolton Landing come back to actually improve their speed figures and run pretty well at Aqueduct on Saturday in the Matron. Those would be Redefined and Dance Macabre. However, they finished second and third behind a 47-1 shot American Apple. I have no idea where this race came from. I kind of went back and watched her prior races just to kind of see what I missed, and I don't know, but sometimes these 2-year-olds can improve unexpectedly.
Well, she definitely improved, but one thing is that she just got such a great trip. They went slow, and the leaders didn't have anything, and she just, she pounced on them and got the jump. I mean, she finished pretty well. Obviously no one saw it coming, or few, since she was 47-1. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how much of an indictment it is. I think it's a little bit. I'm a little concerned that the 2 behind her couldn't quite run her down, but they're fine, but probably not Breeders' Cup horses in my mind.
Yeah, it did feel like the winner really ran. I mean, she just exploded when he got her into the clear at the top of the stretch. And I mean, I was interested to see if Beyer and Craig would agree on this race because it seemed fast compared to the other 6-furlong event at Aqueduct on Saturday. And they both have it a fast race. And Craig gave it a 106, Beyer gave it 87. That's the second fastest speed figure in this division behind Love Reigns. So we'll see if they do go on to the Breeders' Cup with the winner, but it'll be intriguing to see if she can validate that kind of performance.
Yeah, I'm going to be a little skeptical.
I think that would be a fair outlook to have. Let's wrap things up with the male counterpart to the Matron. That was the Grade 3 Futurity run on Sunday's card at Aqueduct. This one resulted in a blanket finish. It was the Graham Motion trained Nagarok, who was coming back on short rest off a maiden score to just barely get the job done. Another horse who got a pretty good trip in victory.
Yeah, I mean, they're all lapped on each other. I don't know. Gaslight Dancer, they cut him back. He went farther at Kentucky Downs, and I thought they'd stretch him out, and indeed, he got a little bit outquicked at the end. I thought he looks like a horse who might want to go a little bit farther. I don't know. What did you think overall of this race?
Yeah, I mean, I always question the quality when you have a blanket finish like this. 5 horses within less than a length of each other at the wire. I agree. I think Gaslight Dancer gave the impression that maybe he could be more than a turf sprinter. The way he stayed on at the end after looking like he was going to get run down. I mean, Nagarot got the kind of trip where you just figured he was going to get there, and I think I was surprised that it was as close as it was at the end. He didn't quite finish off the race. Dunedin, who was way back at the top of the stretch, seemingly completely out of contention, almost got there. I mean, he finished fifth. But you wonder about the quality of races like that, where the whole field comes together like an accordion.
Yeah.
So we'll
Well,
see.
I mean, I'm looking at the raw time for the final furlong, 12:59. That's kind of walking home.
Yeah, compared to the matron the day before, it's much slower. So
Yeah, maybe the matron was better. Maybe it just was a better race.
it would seem that way. I think Craig had it 7 points faster, Beyer had it 5 points faster, and that seems totally fair to me.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, Marcus, that's all the racing to recap from this past week. I want to thank you for taking the time to come on and go through all of this. Hopefully this is helpful to people as they start to prepare for their Breeders' Cup handicapping. There's going to be a lot to sift through over the next several weeks.
Yeah, it was helpful to me, and I enjoyed doing it. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you coming back on. Craig will be back next week. I'll try to have a guest on when I do my handicapping on the TimeformUS forecast a little bit later in the week, so look for that. But all of you listeners, remember you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube wherever you get your podcasts. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Again, thanks for tuning in. Thanks to Marcus, and make sure to tune into that TimeformUS forecast coming up later this week.